Imagine standing at the mouth of a hole in the jungle floor, and instead of silence, you hear wind. Not a breeze, a roar, like the cave itself is exhaling. That is exactly what happened to a Vietnamese forester named Ho Con in 1990, when a sudden storm sent him scrambling for shelter along a limestone cliff in the mountains of central Vietnam. He found an opening. Clouds were pouring out of it. He could hear a river raging somewhere below, in the dark, and a wind strong enough to push against him was blowing straight out of the ground. He was alone, deep in the forest, with no equipment and no idea what he was looking at. So he did the only sensible thing. He backed away, waited out the rain, and went home. He would not find that opening again for 18 years. What Ho Con had stumbled onto, without knowing it, was the entrance to what would eventually be confirmed as the largest cave on Earth. Not the longest. There are longer cave systems elsewhere in the world, but the largest by sheer volume. A single interconnected space so enormous that entire sections of skyline could be lowered inside it and simply disappear. For nearly 2 decades, that fact sat unknown, buried under jungle canopy in one of the most remote and inaccessible corners of Southeast Asia, a place so thick with vegetation and unstable karst terrain that most of the region's caves are still uncatalogued even today. The cave is inside Phong Nha, Cu Bang National Park in Quang Binh Province, a strip of land close to the Vietnamese border with Laos, in a landscape built almost entirely out of ancient limestone. That limestone is the key to the whole story. Millions of years ago, this region was seabed, layers of marine sediment compacted into rock, then got shoved upward as tectonic plates collided, lifting an old ocean floor into a range of jagged, forested mountains. Limestone has a property that granite and basalt don't. It dissolves. Slowly, patiently, slightly acidic rainwater and underground rivers eat their way through it over unimaginable stretches of time, carving tunnels, galleries, and eventually caverns large enough to swallow buildings. Somewhere between 2 and 5 million years ago, a river found a fault line in this rock and began cutting downward. It kept cutting, and what it left behind, when it finally found lower ground, was Son Doong. For years after Ho Con's storm encounter, almost nobody outside his village knew the cave existed, and even he struggled to relocate it. The jungle here is disorienting, trailless, and unforgiving, and a single limestone opening can look identical to 100 others once the rain stops and the light changes. It wasn't until 2008 that he found again, while out on another trek through the forest. This time, he made sure he could find his way back. In 2009, he led a British caving team, part of the British Cave Research Association, into the mountains to see what he had found. The expedition was headed by veteran cavers Howard and Deb Limbert, who had already spent years mapping caves across the same national park. When they finally rappelled down into the opening and pushed into the darkness beyond, they realized fairly quickly that they were looking at something that didn't match anything in the existing record books. The survey that followed, completed in 2010, measured a cave stretching close to 9 kilometers in length, with a central passage reaching roughly 200 meters high and up to 150 meters wide in places. Dimensions large enough that a 40-story building could theoretically stand inside one of its chambers without touching the ceiling. Some sections are wide and tall enough that commercial aircraft could, in principle, fly straight through them. The measured volume came out to around 38.5 million cubic meters of open space, which made it, chamber for chamber, the single largest known cave passage on the planet. Larger than Deer Cave in Malaysia, larger than anything previously recorded in Vietnam itself, including nearby Hang An, which had briefly held a regional record. But the size alone isn't what makes Son Doong strange. It's what happened to the roof. In at least 2 places along its length, the ceiling of the cave has collapsed entirely, opening enormous sinkholes, called doleens, that punch straight through to the surface far above. Sunlight pours down through these openings in shafts, hitting the cave floor hundreds of meters below and creating pockets of daylight inside total darkness. Cavers name one of these collapsed sections the Garden of Eden, where that light lands. Something unexpected happens. Plants grow. Not cave-adapted moss or fungus, but genuine trees, ferns, and dense underbrush, rooted in soil that's built up on the cave floor over thousands of years, forming what amounts to an isolated forest growing under an open-air skylight nearly the length of several football fields. sealed off from the rest of the world by walls of solid rock on every side. Photographers who worked inside the cave described walking from pitch darkness into this pocket of jungle and back into darkness again, within the space of a single passage, an underground forest bookend by cave. That collision of a cool, humid cave environment with warm air pouring into the Dolines does something else that sounds almost invented, but is well documented by the teams who have surveyed it. It generates its own weather. Temperature and humidity differences inside the enormous chambers cause fog and low cloud to form naturally in the air, drifting through the space the way mist moves across a valley at dawn. It's not a supernatural phenomenon. It's basic atmospheric physics playing out inside a room large enough to have its own microclimate. But seeing it in person, drifting cloud banks rolling silently through a cavern the height of a skyscraper, is by every account a genuinely disorienting experience. And it's part of why explorers and scientists alike keep describing the place in terms usually reserved for alien landscapes. The cave also has a river. An underground river runs through long stretches of Sundong, the same watercourse or descendant of it that carved the passage out of limestone in the first place. In the dry season, it's a manageable, sometimes swimmable stream. In the wet season, when monsoon rains hit the mountains above, it swells dramatically and floods lower sections of the cave entirely, which is one of the reasons access is only permitted for a few months each year, and why the cave was effectively unreachable and unexplored for so long. Some passages connected to this river system remain unmapped to this day, simply because the water level or the terrain has made it too dangerous to push further. Then there's what actually lives down there. In the years following the initial survey, researchers, including teams from Hanoi University working alongside the original expedition members, began cataloging the wildlife inside the cave and its surrounding passages, and confirmed several species new to science living nowhere else on record. The full list includes creatures adapted to permanent darkness and unusual pockets of light, blind, translucent fish adapted to the underground river, cave-dwelling spiders, and other arthropods that have never needed pigment, or functioning eyes, flying foxes roosting in the twilight zones near the entrances, and monkeys that move along the forested dolines where sunlight reaches the floor. None of it needs exaggeration to sound remarkable. A cave containing its own working food chain, built almost entirely out of species that evolved to survive in a world with no sun, is already about as strange as ecosystems get. The formations themselves are just as striking. Along one stretch of passage stands a towering calcite wall nicknamed the Great Wall of Vietnam, a barrier of mineral deposits built up over an immense span of time that rises close to 90 meters and, when it was first discovered, took the British expedition team the better part of 2 days to climb using ropes, anchors, and specialized rock climbing gear before they could confirm what lay on the other side. Elsewhere in the cave stand some of the tallest stalagmites ever recorded, mineral towers built drop by drop over hundreds of thousands of years, some so large that cavers have given them individual names, like the formation nicknamed Hand of Dog for its shape. Cave pearls, small, perfectly rounded mineral deposits that form when water action rolls a grain of sediment inside a shallow pool for centuries, have also been found scattered across parts of the cave floor, a formation rare enough that few other caves in the world produce them in comparable numbers. Since that first survey, Sundong has gone from an unknown hole in the jungle to a site recognized twice by UNESCO in connection with the wider Phong Nha, Cua Bang World Heritage Area, and have been featured in major international documentary series, including a segment on the BBC's Planet Earth 3. Access remains tightly controlled. A single licensed operator running multi-day expedition treks is permitted to bring visitors to the cave. The number of permits issued each year is capped, and reaching the cave floor still requires days of jungle trekking. Technical rope work down sheer drops and river crossings. There is no easy or casual way in. Scientists returning to study the cave have continued to find things worth documenting. Previously unrecorded insect species, new details about how the Dolines regulate airflow and temperature throughout the passage, and ongoing questions about exactly how much of the underground river system remains completely unexplored. That last point is worth sitting with, because it's the part of the story that's genuinely still open. Large stretches of the river, inside Sundong, have never been fully traced. Side passages branch off into darkness that expedition teams have noted but not yet pushed into, either because of flooding risk, unstable rock, or simply the scale of what will be required to survey them properly. Caves of this size are not explored once and then finished. They're explored in stages, over years, by teams returning again and again with better equipment and more time. It is entirely possible that Sun Dung still holds passages, chambers, or entire sections of ecosystem that no human being has ever seen or measured. Not because anyone is hiding something, but simply because a space this large, cut into rock this old, in terrain this difficult to reach, takes decades to even begin to fully map. What makes Sun Dung worth talking about isn't a mystery bolted on after the fact. It's the reverse. A place so genuinely strange that the plain, documented facts already sound like fiction. A cave that grows its own forest under a hole in its roof. A cave that makes its own clouds. A river that nobody has followed to its end. Species that exist nowhere else on the surface of the planet, living out their entire evolutionary history in permanent dark, unaware that somewhere far above them, an entire tourism industry, a UNESCO designation, and years of scientific expeditions have grown up around the crack in the earth a rain-soaked forester almost walked past in 1990. He did walk past it, actually, for 18 years. And when he finally found his way back, what he helped uncover wasn't a myth or a rumor passed between villagers. It was measured, surveyed, mapped, and confirmed by name, by volume, by species count, by every method science has for turning a strange story into a documented fact. Sometimes reality doesn't need embellishment. Sometimes the real measurements, the real river, and the real forest growing in total darkness under a hole in a cave roof are already stranger and more worth telling than anything anyone could make up.